Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. Good morning. Thanks for joining. I hope you've had a great conference and will enjoy our final afternoon together. Welcome to Striking Out on Your Own, the benefits and challenges of solo animal law practice. My name is Vanessa Shakib. I practice and teach animal law. I co-founded and co-direct Advancing Law for Animals, a nonprofit law firm focused on issues impacting animals in laboratories and food production. I want to take a moment and thank the conference for holding this panel. As we know all too well, animals need lawyers. And so it's our job to make sure that we have a robust population of practitioners to take on the numerous needs of billions, trillions of animals. It's also personally quite meaningful for me to moderate this panel and to tell you why we have to go in a time machine. The year is 2015. The Animal Legal Defense Fund was hosting a symposium on CAFOs at the University of Southern California. I eagerly attended this event, and a person in the Q&A raises his hand and says, "How can I start a solo practice?" That person was Matthew Strugar. That day, we became great friends. A year later, in 2016, I watched as he launched his own solo practice. Yep. 2 years later, I launched Advancing Law for Animals as a full-time organization. Again, we fast forward a couple years to 2022. Suddenly I'm seeing a new name, Animal Partisan. Who is this person? Will Lowrey, who is he? And I made a note, Vanessa, you have to reach out to this Will Lowrey person. But before I could, he emailed me. We jumped on a Zoom, and we've been friends and colleagues since. And so I'm so honored to moderate a panel of friends, colleagues. I met Jennifer particularly at this conference for this panel. And I think the combination of old friends and new friends is an important testament to this field, how close relationships grow over time. And in the same moment, we're big enough that you're always meeting new people. And so what we're going to talk about today, sure, is the solo practice of animal law, the nuts, the bolts, the finances, but we're also going to talk about the emotional aspect of it, the support, the friendship, the camaraderie, and more. And so with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce the panelists, the wonderful and accomplished panelists we have on stage, starting with Jennifer Friedman. For the past 18 years, Jennifer Friedman has handled hundreds of animal cases before courts and tribunals across Canada. Her work in animal law began in 2006 when Jennifer was hired as the first ever general counsel for the Ontario Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. In 2016, Jennifer opened her own practice devoted exclusively to animal law. She handles a diverse array of files across Canada, including breed-specific legislation issues, condominium matters, dog bite and dangerous dog allegations, equine law, pet custody, and so much more. Jennifer is an invited expert in legal education seminars, teaches animal law and advocacy at the university and law school levels, and is regularly quoted and featured as an animal law expert in mainstream media. Next, we have Matthew Strugar. Oh, yep. Give it up, Jennifer. Next, we have Matthew Strugar, a solo practitioner who has litigated for the animal rights and other social justice movements at his firm, the Law Office of Matthew Strugar. Prior to founding this solo practice, he was the director of litigation at the PETA Foundation and a staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York City. His practice blends activist defense and affirmative litigation to protect the rights of those seeking a more just and equitable present and future. His bio was noticeably short, So I am going to throw in that he is a First Amendment and free speech expert, and we're going to learn more about that in this session. Thank you, Matthew. And our final panelist, Will Lowrey. He is the founder and legal counsel for Animal Partisan, a legal advocacy organization focused on challenging unlawful conduct at farms, slaughterhouses, and laboratories. Will previously spent several years as legal counsel for Animal Outlook, where he divided his time between civil litigation and undercover investigations. Will has engaged in numerous lawsuits as well as criminal and administrative enforcement actions against the government, industrial agriculture, and research laboratories, including cases involving federal slaughter laws, public records, false advertising, public nuisance, animal cruelty, and others. On top of that, Will finds time to teach animal law and has taught at the University of Oklahoma College of Law, Vermont Law and Graduate School, and the University of St. Thomas School of Law. Thank you so much, Will. The goal for today is to have a really genuine roundtable discussion. So I'm going to join our panelists. And I think what we've learned is that everyone loves a good origin story. Kick this off with understanding each of you what led you to animal law. And I'm going to start with Matthew.
Sure. I did not intend to go into animal law. I was a vegetarian when I was 16 because they were out of my parents' house at 18. But my real interest in law was in international human rights litigation. And so I went to law school and ended up at the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York. 9/11 happened on my second week of law school. So I switched from international human rights towards domestic war on terror, civil liberties restrictions post 9/11. But at the Center for Constitutional Rights, so my second or third year there was an indictment of 6 animal rights activists. Your name? Sure, it's not on. I'm sorry. Does that work? Yeah. I apologize. I'm sorry about that. There was an indictment of 7 or 6 animal rights activists on federal terrorism charges in New Jersey. And those activists they reached out to a lot of national nonprofits that weren't really interested in helping them because it really wasn't the social justice aspect that the ACLUs of the world were interested in looking at. But they heard there was like a vegan civil rights attorney in New York who worked at this organization. So they reached out to me. I ended up helping them for a number of years at the appellate and Supreme Court level. We petitioned for review, but didn't get it. But or petition for cert. But through that work, I sort of became the guy at the big national nonprofit that would help animal rights activists, and that developed to the point where I got sort of recruited a little bit by PETA, joined PETA, and started doing animal law kind of full time. So I fell into it a little bit, despite animal rights being sort of my first and closest issue.
That's interesting. And I think that's something that's encouraging for students to hear. How you start your career might not be how you continue your career, might not be how you end your career. There's so much time to move around in the law. Tell us about this Los Angeles Times photo of you. I mean, not every day we see an animal lawyer in the LA Times.
It's just kind of a silly but cute story. As background, if you ever do a single case for a prisoner, a human prisoner, every single prisoner in the prison hears that you're the attorney who will do a case for a prisoner. And so you start getting a lot of mail from prisoners, and they all kind of have a similar kind of cadence. You know, they all start out like attorney Strugar, like there's like a language to them, and there's like a knowledge of the law, like, you know, oh my, you know, these guys study the law because they have a lot of time, and they speak in, you know, legal language, but a little bit different than lawyers do. And I started getting, after I worked at PETA, we filed a 13th Amendment, a case claiming that the orcas at SeaWorld were being held in violation of the 13th Amendment, which is the prohibition on slavery. A few years after that case, I started getting these anonymous postcards, like vintage SeaWorld postcards, written as if they were from the whales at SeaWorld. So they would start like, Attorney Strugar, look at these demeaning tricks that SeaWorld is subjecting us to. this is a violation of our 8th Amendment rights, or is it actually our 14th Amendment rights because we have not been convicted? Which is like a, a nuance, like you don't get an 8th Amendment claim unless you've been convicted. So if it's torture without a conviction, it's a 14th Amendment claim. So, just kind of cute. And they continued for a couple of years before a friend of mine who's also a vegan and an animal rights activist who does a lot of prison litigation, sort of let me know he was coordinating them from around the country. And it was a sort of a hit on social media, and the Los Angeles Times picked it up, which led to this.
I love that story. I really do. Jennifer, tell us about how you arrived in the practice of animal law.
Everyone. I had a love for animals. Can you all hear me? No.
Jennifer, yeah, you got it?
Is it on?
No.
It looks like it's on. Is that better? Okay. So I had a love for animals as a child. When I was in high school, I developed a passion for law. And when I got to university at the University of Toronto, it was a question of how to merge those two passions into a career. When I entered law school in 1999, there wasn't a single course, unfortunately, available at the law school, nor was there an instructor who had any interest in supervising a paper that I wanted to do on animal law. So I had left law school no further ahead, unfortunately. And the prospect of me opening a practice as a new grad was too daunting. I went into admin law and corporate law for a few years. And while I developed some great connections, I was not passionate about those roles. And one day it was like a mirage. I saw a posting for the first general counsel for the Ontario SPCA. I was fortunate to be hired into that role. It was a wonderful experience. Thereafter, I was hired by the Ontario Horse Racing Commission, where I did all their prosecutions on horse cruelty. And then in 2016, I decided, after being with the SPCA and the Racing Commission, that I would take the plunge and open my own practice.
Well, we're going to talk about the bravery that it takes to take that plunge in a minute. Before we move on, though, tell us, how did you come to be featured by the Toronto Star, and who are those furry cuties in the photo with you?
So the furry cuties are my two rescues, Brooklyn from Brooklyn, New York, and Leo from Fresno, California. And this article was in relation to a dangerous dog proceeding I was involved in. And that's a considerable portion of my practice. Unfortunately, a lot of these dangerous dog designations are issued in haste, and they have an irreparable impact on the lives of the animal and their family. And in this particular case, it was especially unusual. Most of these situations are a question of whether the conduct actually amounted to an attack or a bite. In this case, it was actually the identity of the dog that we argued. This wasn't even the dog who was involved in this purported attack. And ultimately, my client was redeemed, and the dangerous dog designation was rescinded.
Well, congratulations. Well, I know you've also had a career pivot. Tell us how you entered the animal law scene.
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay, and apologize to those who've heard this story before. I feel like I've told it a lot, but I had a whole different career before I went to law school. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and had worked for a very large financial corporation for almost 20 years as a process engineer, which is not a very exciting job. And at some point, I got a couple of dogs from the Richmond City Shelter. One of them will be coming up soon. His name is Mac, and the other is Lola, and they were some pit bull type dogs. And for me, that just opened this door to all of these issues with animals. This was probably 2002 or somewhere around there. And I sort of got sucked into animal rescue and figured out what dogfighting was and breed discrimination. And I just couldn't get enough of this volunteering. And there was one point where I was working full-time, but running or volunteering for 11 different grassroots animal groups, rescues, disaster response for HSUS and ASPCA, doing stuff on a Native American reservation, foie gras protests, like whatever I could get my hands on. And at some point, I just had this moment of, walking into these big corporate buildings, and I remember looking and saying, I don't want to die and look back on a life of Excel spreadsheets and buildings like this. And I had done a lot of stuff with cockfighting raids and dogfighting cases, like handling the animals, not from a legal perspective, and had seen the law. Virginia's got an AG's unit that handles animal crimes, and had worked with them a good bit just on these cases, and realized that there's something more meaningful in the law. I didn't know at that point if law school was 7 years or 10 years, and so I was very surprised when I figured out it was 3 years. And there are some schools that have accelerated degrees, and I was like, okay, I won't be that old when I graduate. And so I ended up going to Vermont Law School specifically for animal law. That was my sole focus, and was fortunate enough to graduate. I worked at a criminal court in Trenton, New Jersey for a year, which was a great experience. You can imagine all the criminal stuff happening in Trenton. And then wound up at Animal Outlook for several years, and then left there and started my own thing, Animal Partisan. And I know you're going to ask me what that slide is about, and so I'll preempt that. I started Animal Partisan in 2022. I think in 2023, some of you have probably seen there's some groups out there that monitor animal rights extremists, and they create this web of extremist groups. And AP made that after about a year, and for me, that was kind of a crowning achievement of I'm being a pain in the ass to the right people such that we've made it on this list. And so that was one of my prouder early moments.
I think it really is an accomplishment to hit the ground running and so soon be recognized on an industry watch list. So congrats. And I believe this is a picture of Mac that you mentioned.
That's Mac. He was a puppy at the shelter. We got his mom out too. You never leave the mom behind at the shelter. And so him and Lola were my two dogs, and that kind of started me on this path. And he passed probably 6 or 7 years ago.
That is a priceless photo. So I have to say, as an adjunct professor of animal law, what I'm struck by is the number of students who don't know anything about animal law. They take my course and they come out, holy kale, this is so broad. This is so multidisciplinary. Animals touch upon every area of the law. And we here know that's true. And because we know how broad it is, I'm curious, how do you all specialize if you do?
Did I take that first?
Jump in as you'd like.
My background is in activist defense, so that's essentially where you're not kind of allowed to use the word specialize as an attorney, at least in California, but that's where I focus a lot of my efforts. A lot of defensive free speech arguments when activists get sued or prosecuted by the state. A lot of affirmative cases if they are threatened with some kind of repression. But that's not all. Do a whole lot of things, but because that is kind of my niche, those are sort of the calls that I get, and yeah.
Really all of the mainstream areas of practice, but involving a non-human. So anything from the administrative law cases for dangerous dogs, dog bites, pet custody and ownership disputes, veterinary malpractice, plant-based businesses, as well as assisting municipalities and animal welfare agencies with drafting contracts, agreements, bylaws, and policy.
I guess there may be a couple areas that I spend more time on. I'll look at anything that's will grind the gears of the ag and the laboratory industries, but I would say the two areas that I spend the most time on are trying to get criminal cruelty complaints in factory farms and slaughterhouses. I think that's an underserved area, and there's lots of opportunity and value there. And I've also taken a liking to public records law. I think there's some value in FOIA requests, state public records law, litigation. So those would probably be the two main areas.
Yeah, and I do want to note that yes, animal law is incredibly broad, but even when you get into specific focus areas, like Will and I both focus on animals and labs and food production, even though we have the same focus areas, our work is still so different. And I think that speaks to the opportunity here focusing on these issues. And speaking of, you can do the same or something similar in so many different ways. Everyone on the stage practices animal law, but on their own terms. Matthew and Jennifer, they have a solo traditional practice. Will, like me, has a nonprofit practice. So these models have similarities and fundamental differences. I'd love to hear more about how the structure of your business impacts your practice and the sort of thought that went into for-profit versus nonprofit.
I can start. So Animal Partisan is a nonprofit organization. And so as far as the structure that goes in, there's obviously a lot of overhead with nonprofits. There's rules and regulations. You have to have a board. There's reporting. For me, it was kind of what I knew. I had been a part of so many nonprofits and seen the organization and what they could do. And I also felt like it would allow some flexibility for Animal Partisan to serve in different roles. So it doesn't mean I'm necessarily the attorney on the case, but we could be the plaintiff on the case, right? Or we could be the complainant. And so it allows us to play lots of different roles. It allows us to do stuff that may not be traditional legal, whether it's campaigns or more social media stuff. And for me, it just added some more flexibility in the different types of roles that Animal Partisan could play. Definitely more overhead, but I'm glad we took that structure.
For me, I decided to go into private practice because there was a real gap. Certainly in Canada, it's very different than the United States. There are few practitioners across Canada who have a full-time practice, about a handful of us. So I wanted to be able to service clients who were looking for assistance in their animal-related matters.
Two things I'm antagonistic towards are wealthy people and bureaucracy. So the nonprofit model was just never even an option for me. Also, I was very interested in the profit aspect. I was tired of nonprofit salaries and wanted to make some real money. And in Los Angeles, at least, we had a strong contingent of solo and very small firm people doing not animal law, but civil rights law, who served as a model for me and were able to sort of show me the ropes and at least show me the path to just being your own boss, not having to ask anybody else for money, taking money from the bad guys and keeping that money for yourself.
I will flag another difference between the two models, and I think we're going to get our paws into this when we talk about challenges and we talk more about finances. But nonprofit practice means fundraising, means marketing, means communications. These are entirely different, separate skill sets beyond simply litigating. So Will and I are in a world where it's not enough to be an excellent litigator. We also have to be an excellent fundraiser. That has its own set of challenges for sure, and we're going to dig into that. I think another aspect of animal law that is unique is the flow of inquiries for representation, among other things. I'm wondering, how do you all decide where to focus your time? Time is limited. It's our most precious commodity. How do you figure out what cases to develop, where to put your focus, especially if you're getting a lot of emails about horrific situations involving animals or activists?
Go for it.
It's a matter of both just passion and capacity. I've decided I don't really want to grow, so I haven't hired. I like just being a pure solo, but that comes with a lot of limitations on the kinds of stuff that you can take. And if the phones keep ringing, you're telling a lot of people no. So, what actually tends to be more what gets under my skin. Sometimes it's also like, will this case be revenue generating down the road? Because you don't want to spend 3 years doing something that is unlikely to do that. But it's just usually, does this make me upset enough that I want to spend years and years of my life fighting it?
I receive inquiries. I first determine whether I'm philosophically aligned with what they're trying to do. And I recognize that everyone is entitled to an advocate. And if I'm not able to do that to the best of my abilities, I'll refer it to someone else. So in terms of managing time, I have 3 kids and the 2 fluffy dependents. And so it's managing the time for family responsibilities as well as handling all these cases. And sometimes I'll be staying up all night to get that done, but I generally will accept cases that come before me, and it's just a matter of balancing those out. Certainly in the court process, the delays post-pandemic are profound to the extent that I'm able to balance numerous cases because unfortunately the timeframes are so long to get to court.
Well, before you answer this question, I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
Because I know you deal with an extra dynamic, right? Because you're balancing potential legal matters, legal inquiries, but you're also balancing speaking engagements, mentorship requests, internship requests, moot court drafting, among other things that we really need to support the movement more broadly, and especially because you're sitting from a nonprofit advocacy position. So how do you balance all the requests for your time and energy?
Yeah, it's a little bit different because I don't have so many clients coming, and for the most part, we're coming up with cases on our own. So it's not that people are, I mean, occasionally somebody will come and say, hey, we've got something, would you help us? But a lot of it is idea generation, trying to come up with something that will be impactful for animals. And so in that context, on the legal side, you know, it's really about the value proposition. This might be the former process engineer, but it's like, what is the throughput? At the end of the day, I will invest this much energy, and what will happen, not for me, but for animals, right? Some animal somewhere is going to suffer less, or some factory farm is going to spend more dollars. So it's just an attempt to calculate that is usually what happens on the legal side. All of the other stuff, I'm not great at it, to be honest. Like I know how hard it is to crack into animal law. So I get a lot of law students, interns, you know, adjuncting stuff, and I want to help everybody. It's really just a matter of as basic as looking at your calendar and blocking off time. Like, I'm going to work on this case here, I'm going to do this here. I think transparently, I could do better. You know, I have so many law students helping me. I could probably spend that time more on cases, but it's just an ongoing assessment of here's something new coming in. And I always try to think about the net output, like what is it, right? And it shouldn't be make money, feel good. It's, like I said, some animal suffering somewhere. This thing that's before me, how will it get to that? And if it looks like a good calculus, then I'll try to do it.
It is a, excuse me, it is a tough balancing act for sure, especially when so many of the wonderful things in this field involve weekend time and travel. And so it really is a balancing act. We're going to pivot a little bit. We are entering the spooky season. And one thing that is very scary is starting your own business, particularly in a fringe field where there's not a lot of success models. So I'm wondering, what was it like for all of you making this leap, and how did you find support?
As I mentioned, I was pretty lucky in the sense that we have a robust, at least civil rights solo bar in Los Angeles who could kind of model the path forward, at least for a different area of law, but sort of this same, you know, is nuts and bolts business practices, how to do that. So I moved into a suite with 4 other solos, who are some of whom, one interned for me at my first job, another has been a friend from since law school. So I was lucky to have that support network. But it did involve, you know, investing a good bit of savings into opening up. And the kind of law I do is mostly contingency based, means you have to sort of litigate and win before you ever get paid. So often you're seeing money that you earned a year ago, 3 years ago. This year I had a case, 9 years long case settle. So work you did 9 years ago finally paying off. So the money really, you know, you have to have that cushion from the beginning and be willing to live a little bit lean those first couple of years. But that was basically you know, leaning on other people who had the same experience, and leaning on a bit of a financial cushion to sort of open up, you know, like a new business.
How about you, Jennifer? For me, I felt equipped to go out on my own after I had the wonderful experiences with the SPCA and the Horse Racing Commission. I decided to go out on my own. As I indicated, there seemed to be a big gap in client service. I purchased a building to open my practice. I split it up into two so that I rented out half of it for income. And over time, I actually sold the building because with the pandemic, certainly, and still now, I'd say 99% of my practice is virtual, which certainly reduces the overhead. In Canada, almost all of the court proceedings and tribunal matters and other sorts of meetings are held remotely. So I went from paying for a building to paying for Zoom and DocuSign.
I think for me, I sort of felt like I was at a point where I thought I could figure it out. I know that there are support resources out there, but learned a ton at my time as a law clerk and at Animal Outlook, and sort of got to the point where I felt like whatever it is, I'll figure it out. And I knew there were people out there, and another shout out to these guys. Even before I went to Animal Outlook, I was determined to get into animal law, and I had messaged a animal lawyer listserv saying, is there anybody out there that will talk to me about being a solo practitioner? And this guy responded, as busy as he was, and said, sure, I'll talk to you. And we got on a call. I don't know when this was, who knows, 2018, 2019. Learned that we're both from Richmond, Virginia. Shout out to Richmond, Virginia. I realized there were people out there that will help you, that will answer questions. And when I started AP, it's like Vanessa said, I reached out to her. I was like, look, she's doing it. Like, she'll help me. And not a single person ever said, go away, you're annoying, I'm not going to help you. Like, everybody would get on a call and answer it. And I feel like if you feel comfortable enough that you can figure stuff out, and you recognize that there are other people committed to this work and that will help you, then that builds a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and I'll say for me personally, 6 years in, it's been a roller coaster, and I definitely wouldn't have made it this far without friends and colleagues who offer not just emotional support, but insight. And I know Matthew is someone who I've called to bounce legal ideas off of. If a weird fundraising thing happens, I'll call Will just to do a debrief. And there's so many people that have supported me. Justin Goodman from the White Coat Waste Project taught me about writing a press release and who you send it to. And so I really believe teamwork makes the dream work. And so I'm wondering for you all, do you find meaning and connection in the animal advocacy community? And is that an integral part of your support, emotionally speaking, or in terms of education?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I come to ALC to learn. I come here to learn, but I come here more to make connections. And because a lot of this work is just, learning from other people who are doing the same work, being inspired by other people's work. And I think this is a great place to do that. There are other conferences, and Vanessa used to organize a vegan lawyers brunch once a month in Los Angeles. That was, sort of cool. People would be just talking cases for 2 hours on a Sunday morning. So I think that having that kind of network is maybe not absolutely essential, but it certainly makes things a whole lot easier, both intellectually and emotionally.
In Canada, it's tricky because it's a smaller pool, so there aren't as many people to be able to reach out to and rely on for support. It's a timely question because a colleague of mine and I decided as of this month, she operates a wonderful animal law practice in BC, and we said, we're going to do this every month. We're going to get on a Zoom and share stories, new cases, and provide support for one another.
I would echo a lot of what Matthew said. I mean, there are people out there that are willing to help, and I think you're missing out if you don't reach out to them. There are people going through the same things that have similar ideas about whatever it is, operational reporting or fundraising or litigation. And so I think it's nice being in this community, certainly having events like this that you don't have to reach far, at least in the States, to find somebody that can relate to what you're working on, and not only can relate, but is supportive and will help you out.
And I do want to flag if you're thinking, well, I don't have those friends, so I don't have that support built in. I just want to emphasize how easy it is to build a connection. You know, Will emailed me, we got on a Zoom, and now we are in regular contact. We are friends, we are colleagues. So be brave, send that email. I tell law students, maybe you'll get ignored a few times. Eventually someone won't ignore you and you'll develop a meaningful connection. And I think that's so important when we're dealing with really heavy material. And that's the next question. Starting your own business, operating your own business, you know, that's a lot. But beyond that, we're dealing with animal abuse, we're dealing with horrific photos, horrific videos, horrific fact patterns. How are you all taking care of your emotional health?
I'm going to go back really quick before I answer that, because my answer is basically just I hang out a lot with friends. But as to reaching out to people, you know, I have young lawyers and law students reach out to me a lot about sort of how do I break into, whether it's free speech, whether it's civil rights and prisoner litigation, or whether it's animal law. And I always tell people the first thing is find the people who are doing what you want to do, and just kind of insert yourself or like introduce yourself, which is kind of what you're saying. The second step is then do a good job. There are a lot of people who will insert themselves and then, you know, maybe drop the ball. When I was at Center for Constitutional Rights and involved in this defense of these young people accused of animal enterprise terrorism, you know, I sort of inserted myself in their defense team, and they were pretty skeptical of me. And then I, you know, wrote a draft rehearing en banc petition, and they were like, oh, this is really good. And then they, you know, sort of brought me into the fold. So it's not just introduce yourself, but then do a good job. As for how to deal with the emotional stuff, be good at compartmentalizing. If you're a social person, have a social life of other people who are doing this work and people who aren't, so that you can get away from it and turn off when you need to.
It's really challenging, I find, even till this day. When I had my first day at the SPCA many years ago, I was struck immediately with an atrocious case. And over time, I continued to see those cases. I don't know that it's necessarily easier, and you're not immune, but it's not as much as a shock to you with the underlying recognition that a lot of humans, this group excluded, are not humane. It's tricky. Even now, when I'm operating a private practice, I find at night I'm always thinking about what's going on. So it certainly is a challenge, and it's something to deal with every day, and trying to find some other sort of outlet to work through those things and share stories with others.
I feel like my answer to this question is always different than maybe the PC answer. Like for me, it's just a matter of just hit it head on and find something productive to do about it. And so it's not look away. It's not, I have no social life. So it's like, let me find something that's productive and meaningful in this video that we can do something about. That's the mental health solution for me, is like, as my time winds away on this planet, I am actively doing something about it. I just feel like the situation is too urgent not to, right? Like every minute we have, there are animals suffering all around us. And so I think we have an opportunity every minute of the day to do it. So probably not the PC answer, but that's how I approach it.
I like to walk in nature every day. That helps me. But let's switch a little. We're going to talk nuts and bolts. We're going to talk dollars and cents, whether you're in a private practice or a nonprofit. There's different ways to think about keeping the lights on and monetizing, right? We can think about a contingency model, taking cases contingency, perhaps hourly fees in the case of a nonprofit, grants. Have you all tweaked your financial model? Do you have a blend? How does this work?
Talked a little bit about this already. Most of my cases are contingency, although I have a few institutional animal rights nonprofits that pay me hourly, or a sort of blend between hourly and contingency. plan, just because that kind of keeps the lights on during the leaner times. But most of my cases are contingency, so you work them for years, and if you lose them, you don't see a penny. But if you win them, you often see a lot of pennies. And the problem is navigating that kind of lumpiness. You get a lot of money and try to not spend it all on either your practice or fun, and be able to smooth everything out so that you can keep the doors open.
Mine is quite different. The contingency model doesn't work for my practice. In Canada, unlike in the United States, there aren't the same type of monetary awards. And then to compound the problem, the type of awards for non-human animal cases are a tiny fraction of those. So it just wouldn't work out in terms of making any sort of income. So mine is based on an hourly fee, but what ultimately happens is I regularly give significant professional courtesy reductions because I ethically can't charge clients for the amount of hours I've actually spent on their cases.
So mine is like yours, and I know we talk a lot and share ideas and strategies, but so Animal Partisan's a nonprofit, and so it's a lot about grants, foundations, private donations, and those types of things. And that for me was just a horrifying world when I started. It's like, how do you ask somebody for money? What are those interactions like? And so I guess I would just go back to, there are people that are willing to help you. You know, Vanessa was one. I see Joyce Tischler out there. Joyce has been generous with her time to help me with some guidance. And so even if you don't know, you can figure it out, and there are people. But for me, it's just about doing work that people believe in such that they will support you financially so you can continue to do it, and then finding those abilities to connect with people, whether it's a conference or somebody else has a connection, and then having that support network that I mentioned that can kind of talk you through things like, what does this mean and what should I do here? I think all of those things have been instrumental.
Yeah, and I'll say that even in the nonprofit world, you can have a financial model more diverse than institutional grants only. I'll say personally for my organization, I started off on this journey rather naive. I thought, oh, how hard could fundraising be? It's actually quite hard. We started off saying we'll never charge anyone a penny. We want animals in court. It came to be, though, we realized we're representing organizational clients with very large, healthy budgets. And so they actually could make a low bono contribution. And we've diversified grant applications because I'm a great litigator, terrible fundraiser, right? So we're not pulling these big grants. Our small dollar donor base is important. And at the same time, we've succeeded. And so when it's about to be, you know, a $0 left, we get attorney's fees. And so I think even in the nonprofit world, the financial model can be diverse. That really is an evolution. Switching gears a bit, I think animal law is unique because it is newsworthy. And we started this presentation seeing wonderful news clips featuring you all. What tips do you have for either getting media or handling media?
My tip is to turn that question back to you, because I don't do a whole lot of media, and I think you do incredible media. So I think everybody would benefit from hearing from you first, you know, how you got Cedar to go viral, how you get this Foster Farms media, etc.
That's kind of you to say, but I'll know only your face is in the Los Angeles Times.
Was it about a case?
So I want to know.
Someone pulled a prank on me.
So what was that like? How did you, I did an LA Times photographer do a custom photo shoot of you outside your office? Like, let's hear about how you handled that.
The real, I have sort of two real answers for media. As to animal law cases, I'm lucky that most of my 90% of my animal law cases involve big institutional animal rights nonprofits, whether that be ALDF, PETA, White Coat Waste Project. And they have media people, and they can do that kind of stuff. For generating my own media on like civil rights cases where just have individual victims of civil rights abuses, the answer isn't really applicable today. The answer was like sort of like be a funny jerk on Twitter and get a big following of reporters. Honestly, and then talk yourself up on social media back when there were before it became X the everything app and turned into the kind of cesspool that it is now. But there is that kind of self promotion, but it's not. I don't think it's quite as effective as the work that you do. But
What about you, Jennifer? Any media tips?
For me, because again, it's a small pool and the media is looking for someone in this practice area who is able to speak to a variety of issues. And with one media profile or article, then the other outlets will look to that if there's another story. So it just sort of happened that way as a result of, again, being such a small pool.
Yeah, I too would love to hear from Vanessa, but media is not a strong suit of mine. I guess the things that I would say is one, relationships are important with reporters. I spend a lot of time answering we do a lot of public records requests and just helping reporters answer questions or here are some documents, look on this page. That's led to stories. We had a story in Forbes not long ago that I never knew was going to happen, and it came about because I was helping the journalist answer some questions about a slaughterhouse in Iowa. So I think relationships are big. And I think the other area that I try to focus on is local media. A lot of people want the LA Times or the CNN, but don't forget about the Bucks County Beacon, for example, right? Especially if you're going after a slaughterhouse in the community, what's more damaging to them than to let all their neighbors and family members know the horrible things that are happening? Like that's more impactful in a local area. And those stories are a lot easier to get, right? They're looking for newsworthy stuff. So don't forget about the local media as well.
Yeah, and I would say that media is its own topic. We could have a seminar. If the powers that be are listening next year, a media workshop would be incredible. I think that when I first came into this field, so silly, I thought that reporters go investigate and figure out what to write about. I had no idea that no, reporters are spoon-fed press releases. And so whether you're in nonprofit practice or traditional practices, press releases can be a part of your practice. Every lawsuit I file, I send out a press release. And again, so do traditional practitioners. Lisa Bloom, vegan civil rights attorney, she sends out press releases for her work. There's a lot of tips on how to write an effective press release. I can tell you that these are skill sets that you can acquire. I write all of my own. You really want to spoon feed the information and make it very easy for reporters interested in your case. And because we're pressed for time, I'll leave one thought that I think is very cool. As lawyers, we're academic. We're thinking about writing documents for the purposes of educating the judge. But it's also important to write your pleadings, write your complaints with an eye towards making it accessible for the public and reporters reading. So my complaints, my beginning paragraphs are strategically quite compelling. And I've seen reporters directly quote from the very first paragraph of the complaint because like us, they're busy. They're skimming, they're reading quickly, make it so easy for them to grab and go. And so I think that's really important, especially. We are going to move into Q&A soon, but before that, there's something that we skipped over talking finances, and I want to bring back to this point because Matthew, you have a blended practice. So you're civil rights and you're animal law. Jennifer, you are exclusively animal law. I'm curious how you made the exclusive practice work. Matthew, were you strategic in splitting up your practice? And just looking forward, how feasible is a full-time private animal law practice?
let you start that.
Okay, thanks. Please join me, anybody who's interested in coming to Canada. The caveat is the climate. I'm talking temperature and political wise, but that's for another discussion. But there really is a gap in Canada. So if you are interested, I think there are a lot of opportunities in Canada to open an animal law practice. And so that's how I made the decision to take the leap, because there was this gap, and it's been a busy practice. And there are certainly enough files for others to join the practice area. So that's really my hope in the next 5 years, that there will be more practitioners in Canada in this area.
I opened the blended practice because when I did civil rights law for humans, I missed animal rights law. And when I did animal rights law full time, I missed the civil rights law for humans, and thought I could do a little bit of both and make myself happy that way. I think I probably could run my practice full-time animal law if I wanted to, but there's not a, it's, if you're only focusing on activist defense, now you have sort of Denver project that's doing a lot of those. You have to get barred in a lot of states wherever activists are getting arrested or harassed. So that becomes a problem. But there are a lot of animal law, I don't know about a lot, but there are a number of animal law attorneys in California who exclusively do animal law. A lot of times they're doing things like veterinary malpractice. They're doing dangerous dog. They're doing a lot of companion animal, divorce and separation, custody kind of things. So it's a little bit more of a broader type of animal law practice, but there's people doing it, and I think there's room for more people to do it. I certainly get a lot of calls about custody issues and about veterinary malpractice that I refer out at least once a week.
I agree. I get a lot of requests for representation regarding companion animal issues. So I think there's always something to do there. Matthew, I'm curious, you earn a living through contingency work. What causes of action related to animals are you collecting on the contingency fee model?
Well, like you've said already, and other people have said, animal law can be a lot of different things. And some of those have what's, fee shifting, where you get your money from the bad guy at the end if you win. And some of them don't, but some things I'll throw out that have fee shifting are, I do a lot of anti-SLAPP work. Just very briefly, what an anti-SLAPP statute is that when belligerent, litigious millionaire sues a poor person for their speech just to shut them up, and they're not really intending to win, you can, in most states, file a motion to get that kicked out and make the litigious millionaire pay the attorney's fees for the indigent person who was sued to be silenced. I do a lot of that work. I do a lot of FOIA work for the White Coat Waste Project and others. FOIA has fee shifting. I do a lot of sort of affirmative 1983 litigation, which is the constitutional torts. So you bring a First Amendment claim sort of against a government entity who is suppressing the speech of either animal advocacy organizations or others. And those are probably the three largest buckets, but something you do have to look for when you're doing this practice is either find an institutional client who's willing to pay you, or find a fee shifting route so that at the end you don't have to charge your client anything and the bad actor has to pay you.
Yeah, I think if you get creative, you can bring cases that allow you to work on a contingency model. So thanks for sharing more of those details. Before we transition to Q&A, I want to go through and just hear from you the most rewarding part of your practice and the biggest challenge.
I'm going to kick it over here first.
Sure. The rewarding part for me is the ability to come up with ideas, right? Is to see this horrible system that animals are suffering in and find some path in the legal system, and then to see that to fruition and see it work and have a meaningful result. So for me, the ability to be creative is meaningful. The biggest challenge is what we talked about. It's just balancing the work, especially when you're running a nonprofit and you're doing ops work, fundraising, communication, social media, legal work. It's like, where do you spend your time? So it's kind of a daily juggling match that I would certainly say is the most challenging part of it.
For me, the most rewarding is being able to speak on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves. And the most challenging is not being able to do enough.
For me, I think the most rewarding is when I'm able to help an activist or a series of activists stay out of trouble that they probably should have been in, and then succeed in their campaign. And I've been able to see that a lot. Keep people out of courts or out of jail, and keep them on the streets, continuing to press to do what they do. Because I'm not that great of an activist, but I'm good at helping those who are. And when they get those wins, you feel like you're really a part of it, and that's lovely. And the most challenging is dealing with losses. I take a loss 10 times worse than I have joy in a victory, and the losses can be pretty dark for a couple of weeks. And you just gotta, have good social network and power through that.
Well, we could certainly talk all day. We are going to transition for, unfortunately, a brief Q&A because we are pressed for time. I do want to share a little birdie told me. Oh, we're out of time? We're not out of time. Oh, I thought we had 5 minutes left. Wow. Okay, great. We're winning, everyone. Abundance mentality. All right. Perfect then. So a little birdie told me that this year we have 100 more attendees than we had at the Animal Law Conference last year. Right? To me, this means positive news for our legal movement. What do you all think about the future of animal law?
Send it down there.
I mean, it's tough. It's very bright on one side because there are so many people interested in animal law, and just the number of students that I hear from that want to get into this field is great. And if all things were equal and they could all get jobs, things would be a lot better, but that's not the reality. And so there's obviously funding gaps. As I say this, I realize this would be a pessimistic answer, but we talk a lot about things are going great, but if you look at the number of animals killed, the meat consumption, things are going up. And so I don't think we should fool ourselves. And so there's certainly a place for animal law. I don't really think there's an alternative. Like, we have to do it. Like I said earlier, animals are suffering. And so it's refreshing to see lots of people interested. And I think we need all those people, and we need to find ways to get them plugged in, whether that's with large groups or pro bono or volunteers or whatever the case is.
Last night, the Lifetime Achievement Award was presented. I heard sage advice, which really resonated with me, from Eric Lizenstein when he said, "Don't be defeated." And I think that's an important aspect if you're hoping to pursue or continue to pursue this area of law, that you really have to be prepared to persevere and recognize there are some very difficult losses, but there's some incredible highs. And I've always considered crawl, walk, run. And based on the fact that the conference is growing, it's showing that the movement is continuing to grow.
Yeah, the interest is certainly inspiring and promising. I think the challenge is building that capacity to absorb the younger attorneys and law students who are interested into the existing framework. There's not a lot of organizations. There's not a lot of jobs. I was excited to have this panel because I wanted to show people you can do this without going that route. Yeah, I think you could. I don't know that I'd recommend it, but I think you can even do it right out of law school. I think there are opportunities to sort of build your own organizations, your own private practices without having to go through, the 20 prestigious jobs at ALTF or, the 10 staff attorneys at PETA. Those are very competitive jobs. And sometimes when people get in them, they stay there for life. So the challenge is building capacity and expanding the opportunities to bring in the people who are interested and keep them, so we don't lose them to things like, I have a friend in LA who wanted to do animal law, and now he's doing employment defense for Walmart, and he's just miserable. So we really gotta build the space to bring in the enthusiasm and weaponize it.
I think it is important that everyone interested in this field learns about the multitude of career trajectories available. And I always emphasize, you might not like how you started, you can always pivot, you can always transform, you can always broaden your practice. We've talked so much about challenges, the funding, the subject matter. Given all of this, would you do this all again? Was it worth it for you to start your own practice?
I can go first. I would do it again, and I would do it a lot earlier. I did it 16 years in. I was at a job for 5 years, 2 years, and 5 years. I think I could have spent half the time at each of those jobs, maybe a lot less. You never feel like you never, I don't know, at least for me, I never felt like, oh yeah, I really know this. I really know how to do this. I can do this. Always a little feel like I still could learn more. I could benefit from learning under a mentor for longer. But I think most people really learn by being thrown in the deep end and figuring it out themselves. So I would do it again, and I would do it a lot earlier.
For me, I would do the same thing over again, 100%. It's a very rewarding practice. I felt equipped from the skills I've developed from the in-house roles, and it is daunting to start without having that experience. But I'd recommend for anyone who's interested in pursuing this field, if you are considering attending these conferences, trying to volunteer for animal law practitioners or at animal welfare agencies. And now that everything, or certainly in Canada, is all done virtually, there's a lot of opportunities to be able to observe court proceedings and hearings in the animal welfare space and develop that experience.
Yeah, I absolutely would have done it. Kind of to Matthew's point, I probably would have not had a prior career and done it much sooner. But for me, I feel like it's a privilege to be able to wake up every day and do this work. I think there's not really a greater need in the world. And so I'm glad I did it and would do it again in a heartbeat.
Well, that's a great note to start our Q&A. If you're in person, please line up at the microphone. And if you're virtual, there is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen.
First of all, thank you so much for your inspiring words and empowering words. This was an incredible discussion and panel, so thank you so much. I wrote my question down because I have a tendency to kind of go all over the place. So, as an adjunct animal law professor myself, like some of you are, clearly we all believe that a blend of educating future generations along with the practice in itself is important. What are your thoughts on sort of bridging that nonprofit animal law world and focused practice with that solo practice by really starting animal law clinics, but especially at law schools that aren't these heavy hitters? So not necessarily Vermont, Lewis and Clark, Harvard, not those schools that already have that space covered, but where I went to school, Texas Tech or UT Law or Wisconsin or other law schools that may be a little bit less well known in that space, so that we can develop those clinics and bring in some of these recent grads to provide them with the tools that they need so that they can then start their own solo practices in the future. And what is holding these non-heavy hitter law schools back from incorporating these animal law clinics into those law schools, and how can we get that going?
Question, and something I've advocated for when I was invited to teach animal law, more of an introduction to animal law. I proposed that very thing, to be able to give law students the opportunity to develop those practical skills. And there wasn't so much of an appetite, certainly in the schools that either have no animal law course or just have one. What I'd recommend is for law students, if this is something you're really interested in, is to speak to the dean or speak to the professor or instructor who's teaching the animal law course to express that interest.
I can add to that a little bit. I think clinics are great. I mean, the caveat I would say is that I don't think anybody should go start a clinic with the assumption that all the students will graduate and get staff attorney jobs, right? Because as we talked about, that's not realistic. But if people want to come into an educational environment, get practical skills, knowing that that may not be their career path, I think that's great. And in my experience, like there's just this delta between the students who are interested in the administration that is hard to overcome. And the best way that I've seen that, you know, and whether it's getting an animal law class or getting a pro bono project, is having really passionate students in the school that sort of build up this momentum within the school, take it to the administration. So to your question of like what's missing or what's the problem, I think it's that delta between the administration and the passionate students that want to get it done. And somehow you just have to close that.
I'm going to throw in one more problem and barrier. Love clinics, the more the merrier. They cost money. It is a lower threshold to get one animal law course because the law school pays an adjunct wage, which I can tell you is like limbo low. And so a clinic, I don't know the numbers. I would imagine programmatically, time-wise, it is extensive. You would need to start with a grant or an endowment. Welcome to the world of fundraising. It's tough. But I encourage you to take that on if that's something you're passionate about. I think if the funding is there, it's possible. And then of course you have other issues. How many students are interested? Are there jobs for the students afterwards? But first and foremost, there is that financial hurdle to fund the clinic, which takes more resources than one animal law course.
Thank you.
This is a practical question, I think, for the nonprofit attorneys. When you're bringing cases in jurisdictions that are not your home jurisdiction, how many states are you barred in? Do you use local counsel? Do you use pro hoc vice? How difficult is it? Does that affect the decision where you bring cases?
Yeah, so I'm barred in 3 states, but we've brought cases or actions in probably 15 or 20 different states. And to your question, it's using local counsel, right? And I think some of this gets back to the power of networking and knowing people. I keep a spreadsheet by state, like who do I know in this state if I find a good case that I can go to? And so, yeah, it's either, well, it is find a local counsel if you're not barred there, and then either they're going to take the case or you can pro hoc in and they'll be your sponsor. So I think that the trick is if you're going to do cases in jurisdictions, lots of jurisdictions, then yes, you either need to be barred there or you need a good network of people. Do I look for cases in a state where I have a good attorney? Probably not so much. I'll look for a good case and then find the attorney after the fact, right? And I found that just you can cold call attorneys. I mean, sometimes I have one in Minnesota. It took me a dozen attorneys and some crazy ones, and I finally found one. But you can cold call people and just email. There's a lot of people doing practices that don't often get cases that sort of morally fulfill them, and they're happy to get it. And it's like, yeah, I'll talk to you about that. So it's not as hard as it seems to find local counsel in states if you don't have it already. That's been my experience.
And Will is unique. He works in a number of states. My work is exclusively California and in DC, and I'm barred in both of those.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Piper. Sorry. Hi, I'm Piper. I'm an LLM student at Lewis and Clark. Thank you so much for this presentation. I know for those of us considering striking out on our own, the 4 of you up there are success stories that we can really look up to. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. My question is for Will and Vanessa. When you were considering doing the nonprofit maybe versus the for-profit, did you consider doing for-profit as well and the nonprofit on the side, or were you only interested in the nonprofit? And what made you decide to go with the nonprofit if you did consider for-profit as well?
Go ahead.
I'll candidly say I assumed a nonprofit model, but now that I'm 6 years in, I think to myself, golly whiz, I spend so much time fundraising and marketing and on communications. Should I have a blended private practice where the other practice area provides more secure funding for my animal law work? These are questions I ask myself.
Yeah, I mean, I thought briefly about a private model, and it was, I'm in Virginia and there's not that many people that do animal cases. And so having been around for a while, you know people and they come to you and it's like, oh, there's this dog situation or a pet store. And so I had seen that there's a volume and you could probably do it. And I thought about, gosh, could I make some mid-Atlantic practice, get barred in Maryland, North Carolina, Virginia, and just take any animal? But for me, it was more about the cases that just walked in the door weren't the ones I wanted to do. Like I wanted to go after labs and factory farms and people aren't coming, or at least in my experience, to say like, hey, will you sue this slaughterhouse for me? But that's what I wanted to do, and that's where I thought, I would add the most value. So that's kind of why I went that route.
And I'll say one more plug, though, why the nonprofit model is essential in this movement. And it's because a nonprofit model allows lawyers to take on more risk in a case. If you are considering every case as a financial calculation, you may be more risk averse. And so there's a balance there. And I think that means that even if we have a sea of private practitioners, we'll always need nonprofit practitioners to really push the envelope in risky ways that private practitioners might not want to.
Thank you.
Ooh, look at that t-shirt.
I know, this shirt. If you'll just grant me a moment to just give a plug that I am Laura Ireland. I'm the Associate Director of the Animal Law and Policy Institute at Vermont Law and Graduate School. I am open to helping all of you and any of you with any curriculum development and lend any area of expertise that we can. That's the most favorite thing that we do. We have a careers page on our website that lists every open job opportunity that I can find anywhere. So I encourage you to look at those, and they include internships, externships, all the way to CEOs of wherever and whoever. And I'm teaching a farm to animal advocacy practicum in the spring, which is online and open to students from anywhere. And we're hoping to expand that to just a general animal advocacy practicum to do all sorts of cases. And I was a practicing attorney, and I want to help all of you learn how to take cases from beginning to end and do what they do. So,
Oh, amazing.
yes, email me, call me, do anything.
Yeah. All right, are we, looks like we're at the end of our questions. Any virtual questions? No? Any closing notes? I think we have another minute. Any final words?
If anyone has further questions, I invite you to call or email me. I'm happy to communicate.
Yeah, same. I've never not said yes to an email for somebody to talk, and so happy to chat. And I do think it can be done, right? There's stuff to figure out. We can all figure stuff out. And so there are certainly constraints, but if anybody's thinking about doing something along these lines, it's possible, and there are people that will help you.
I'll offer one extra thing. When I was looking to open my own practice and was talking to a lot of solo practitioners, they were often very generous with their time and advice for like how to get cases and whether you need an office and things like that. When I started talking to people about like, how much did it cost to open your doors? And how much do you make this? How much did you make last year? People shut down pretty hard. So I sort of resolved myself to be willing to talk about the money with people who want to talk about the money. So I'll put that offer out there to anybody who ever sort of wants to know, like, what does it take to get off the ground? What does it actually look like in practice? What's possible? What's realistic? Those kinds of things. Just Matthew at MatthewStrugar.com. Feel free to email. I'm not going to give my phone number out like Rachel and Manny, but
One quick final note, actually. How can everyone stay up to date with your work? I know Animal Partisan is on every social media platform. You should follow now if you don't. Any other ways to stay in touch?
My website, canadasanimallawyer.com.
I don't really update my website anymore. Be my friend.
All right. Thank you everyone for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation.